Hi everyone, thanks for watching my video about the high school course American History. My goal is to share a little bit about myself as an instructor, as well as give an outline of the class. First, about myself, my name is Mrs McCrary. I am from the Kansas City, Missouri area. I graduated from the University of Missouri in Columbia. While I was there, I studied secondary social studies education. I became certified to teach both middle school and high school levels. Through my courses at Mizzou, I also received a multicultural certificate. While I was in college, I had a really great summer English teaching experience in South Korea as a part of a program through the Asian Affairs Center at my university. After I graduated college, I then started my teaching career in 2013. I later worked towards a master's degree through William Woods University, where I received a degree in education administration. Right now, I teach high school social studies. My passion is, of course, social studies. I really enjoy teaching American history. Not only do I teach it, but I am still and always will be a student of American history. I love reading and learning about the experiences and the stories that make up this nation. But alongside of American history, I also teach AP psychology, which I also enjoy very much. Outside of teaching, I get excited about exploring the United States as well as countries around the world. I like visiting historic sites. I like learning about people and places of the past. I also enjoy spending time with my family, playing outdoors, making crafts with my kids. I like to read, and I also like to listen to books. This is considered United States History Part 2. So the Missouri State Standards are designed to move students through the early events of American history prior to coming to high school. So students should have already learned about things like exploration, European settlement in the colonies, transatlantic trade, American slavery, the Revolutionary War, the early frontier settlement, and also they'll end before coming to high school learning about the American Civil War. So this class will pick up where students left off in their previous social studies course about American history. This class begins in 1865 at the end of the Civil War, and the era is called Reconstruction. Now, by the end of the school year, students will move all the way through the 20th century. So this course is just a survey course, which basically means it's a really broad overview of some of the major topics in this time span of 1865 to 2000. Every year I have students who are so excited to learn about a very specific topic, and then they find out the next class period we're moving on to something new. And I definitely understand their disappointment. There are some eras that are so interesting to me that I could spend a whole semester on, but since it's just a survey course, I try to remind them that we're learning about a broad and very big span of time, but I want them to know that there is an opportunity during the school year to do a research project where they're going to pick a very narrow topic of interest in the curriculum where they will study more deeply. So I usually tell them keep some of those ideas in their mind, those things that they're interested in for that time period. So the aim of this course is for students to develop historical thinking skills as they delve into the story of America. Through the course of the school year, students will evaluate people and places and events that make up the 20th century. Finally, one of my personal goals is for students to grow in their sense of empathy. By learning about the stories of other people, those who've gone before us, I think that the stories of history have incredible lessons for all of us if we read and listen to their voices and experiences. So let's start with what students will learn and practice while they are in American history this year. First, they're going to be analyzing primary source documents. As students look at primary source documents this year, it's important that they know how to read them, how to interpret them, determine the author's intent, who is their audience, and what is its overall meaning. Students will also add some reading strategies to their toolkit as well. It's important for them to walk away this school year having the ability to process some of this information they're reading in meaningful ways. These are called close reading strategies, and so these will help them as they move on through high school and some of those upper level courses that require them to do more reading, have more reading stamina, and reading comprehension. So this will also prepare them for the ACT when they're doing reading components, and while it's just going to prepare them for life because reading is a very important skill. Students will also consider multiple perspectives. Students will be asked to consider multiple viewpoints and experiences in history. Hopefully this will carry on with them as they leave school. They'll be able to contemplate how events affect different people in different ways. Another skill that students will be working on is determining cause and effect. This skill is essential in history since no event stands alone. There are all consequences of actions that came before. Students are going to contemplate both causes and effects throughout the course of American history. Students will also be working on comparing and contrasting. This is probably the skill that students come into this class most prepared for, but it's always good to continue practicing this historical thinking skill to be able to look for similarities and differences between different topics. The last skill is recognizing continuity and change over time. This is probably the most difficult skill for students, and we might introduce it until the end of the school year, but it's definitely going to be a skill that students will practice as they continue on studying history in high school. This skill draws on students' ability to think about a theme over time and judge how it's evolved and changed or stayed the same over time. And of course, students will be working on their writing skills in this class. Most of these skills have a writing piece where they're justifying those answers through their thoughts into writing. Next, the rest of the video will focus on an overview of the content, so you have an idea of what students will be working on and learning about this school year. Students will begin with the Reconstruction era, which takes place immediately following the Civil War. It was an attempt by the United States to integrate the Southern states back into the Union while also introducing millions of once enslaved people into freedom and civic life. And in this unit, students will learn about those new freedoms and rights that were extended, as well as some of those struggles and setbacks that occurred. The next unit is westward expansion. This is when American settlers began setting up homesteads west of the Mississippi River, and it led to conflicts with tribes that were already inhabiting the plains. In this unit, students will focus on the causes of westward expansion, the conflicts, and some of the consequences. The next period is the time period that Mark Twain referred to as the Gilded Age. And during this era, industry was booming and cities were growing, but Americans were faced with economic and political and cultural challenges. In this unit, students will learn about turn of the century immigration, they'll learn about urbanization, and they'll learn about industrialization. In the Progressive era, students will focus on the domestic issues that were created by the Gilded Age, and they're going to focus on some reform efforts that happened during that time period. Some of the issues that they'll learn about during that time period were deforestation, child labor, women's disenfranchisement, the lack of regulations in the factories and the workplaces, the lack of regulations on the food production and processing industries. Next, students will learn about the age of American imperialism. As European countries were gaining the wealth and the power through expansion of their borders, students will learn about how the United States joined into that global competition. The areas that students will focus on are the motivations behind American imperialism, the Spanish-American War, the Philippine-American War, and the American influence in Latin America. The World Wars tend to be an area of fascination for students. In World War I, students will focus on the causes of the conflict. They'll learn about the United States' involvement in it. They'll also learn about the impact it had on Americans and the effect of the Treaty of Versailles. After World War I, students will learn about the 1920s, when the United States entered this time of prosperity and progress, as well as tension and turmoil. In this unit, students will determine both how prosperous and how problematic this decade was. The next unit is the Great Depression. Those who lived through this era experienced what was likely the worst economic catastrophe, coupled with one of the biggest environmental disasters of the 20th century. In this unit, students will learn about some of just basic economic terms. They'll learn about the causes and effects of the stock market crash. They'll learn about both President Hoover and President Roosevelt's approach to the Depression, and they will study the Dust Bowl. Next, students will see that the Second World War was a continuation of some of the issues that were stemming from World War I. Some of the major topics they'll learn in that unit are the failures and consequences of the Treaty of Versailles, the attack at Pearl Harbor, the effects on the American home front, key battles in the European and Pacific theaters, and the atomic bomb. Students will start to feel a shift to more modern topics they might feel, or maybe they might even describe them as more relevant to them. But we're going to shift into the Cold War, which spanned nearly 4 decades and resulted in dozens of conflicts around the world. In this unit, students will focus on major concepts like the consequences of World War II, The places of conflict in the Cold War, like Berlin, Cuba, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and they'll also learn about some major events that impacted American life, like the space race, the arms race, McCarthyism. And as we near the end of the school year, students will learn about the civil rights movement, which aimed to extend constitutional and legal rights to African Americans and people of color across the country. Students will learn about the different types of demonstrations that took place. They'll learn about the process to integrate public schools. They'll learn about the perspectives and the people that made up the civil rights movement. They'll learn about major events such as the March on Washington, the Selma March, and others. And finally, students will study other movements that coincided with the civil rights movement, such as the Chicano movement and the American Indian movement. The Modern America unit falls right at the end of the school year. Students will get a brief overview of some of the major political, economic, and social events of the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, from 1972, the Watergate scandal, all the way to the 2001 attack on the World Trade Centers. Thank you for watching my video about American history with Mrs. McCrary. Hopefully it gave you a better understanding of the skills and the content that students will work on through this year in my classroom. And if you would like to take an even closer look at some of the Missouri State standards for this course, I'll post a link in the video details below. I'll also attach a link to my syllabus so that you can learn more about the expectations I have for my students in my classroom. Please reach out by email if you have any questions for me. Thank you so much for watching.